Don't you dare touch my car with those filthy hands!
The shout of billionaire Anthony Wright echoed across the empty industrial park. Thick white smoke billowed from the body of the Quantum Apex, a hypercar of which only 17 existed in the world. Through that haze, a thin black man in a torn, faded jacket quietly stepped forward. No one in the crowd knew that the homeless man they saw was about to save a $4 million machine. Anthony Wright, founder of Nexus Innovations, was in panic. The car's quantum cooling system was emitting an eerie hiss. The dashboard flickered red with warnings. He'd called 3 engineers in succession. None answered. The curious crowd began recording. A few even laughed. To Anthony, this was a nightmare. His reputation, credibility, and a high-stakes investor presentation just 3 hours away. All of it could evaporate. "Sir, the quantum cooling circuit has a microfracture in the second loop," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. "I can fix it." Anthony froze. How could a homeless man possibly know about technology so classified that even the manufacturer denied its existence? He looked at the stranger. Curly hair, frayed coat, deep eyes that seemed to hold a long story. Anthony tightened his grip on his phone, ready to call security. But something in the man's tone gave him pause. "Who are you?" "Thomas Johnson," the man replied. "Mechanical engineer. I used to work at Aerotech Industries." 3 years earlier, Thomas hadn't been living beneath abandoned eaves. He was the man who designed the jet cooling system that reduced overheating accidents in aviation, a breakthrough that saved thousands of lives. Now, he slept under the open sky, folding his tarp with the precision of an aerospace engineer. Each morning, he washed his face at a public faucet, brushed his teeth with a worn brush, and headed to the city library. Knowledge, he told himself, is the one thing they can't take away. Thomas held an MIT degree, triple majored in engineering, and owned 7 patents, inventions that had earned millions for corporations that later disowned him. He was cast out of the industry over false accusations, labeled as not a cultural fit. He knew what that really meant. They didn't want a black man sitting at the technical boardroom table. Instead of collapsing, Thomas began teaching homeless children science in the evenings. By day, he scavenged discarded tech magazines, reading and taking notes. Knowledge was the last thread connecting him to his former world. That morning, as the Quantum Apex cruised through Tech Row, Thomas had heard something wrong, a faintly off rhythm in the engine's hum, something only someone who had worked on its prototype could detect. He had once warned of microfractures forming in the secondary cooling chamber, but his report was dismissed as unfeasible for production timelines. And now, just as he had predicted years before, the hypercar was smoking in the street, with the very man who had ignored that warning standing before him. Thomas approached carefully. He knew his disheveled appearance made him more likely to be met with a security call than a second of attention. Anthony stared back, not with recognition, but with the wary calculation of someone assessing a threat. 3 years ago, Thomas had been invited to speak at the same tech conference where Anthony was the headliner. They had nearly crossed paths, until Thomas's life was shattered by those false accusations. The tech world has a short memory for truth, but a long one for scandal. Now, standing before the dying machine, Thomas watched the pale blue-gray smoke curl upward, a detail precise enough to confirm the failure's cause. He could fix it with just a few basic tools. Perhaps it was professional pride, perhaps the yearning to be seen again, or perhaps Thomas Johnson had simply never stopped wanting to repair a world that had abandoned him. Anthony ended his 5th call, furious. Phones recorded, whispers spread. The tech billionaire stranded on the street. "Step away from the car," he barked, the voice of a man used to obedience. Thomas kept his distance, his tone calm. "Sir, the quantum cooling system has a breach in its second loop. If you don't act now, the engine will burn out in under 50 minutes. Anthony turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I'm the one who designed its prototype," Thomas replied. A sharp, cold laugh escaped Anthony's lips. The crowd joined in awkward chuckles. "Right," he said, "and I teach astrophysics at the community college on weekends." He turned away, tapping his phone again. Thomas remained still, unshaken. "The blue-gray smoke means the coolant is leaking into the tertiary chamber. If you don't stop it, the entire system will melt down." Anthony froze. It was blue-gray smoke, and the warning system had just displayed a 47-minute countdown to total failure. How do you know that?" "Because I warned about this before. In 2020, in the report your company ignored." A sleek black SUV roared up. 2 security guards stepped out, faces cold as steel. "Is there a problem, Mr. Wright?" "No. This man is about to be moved on," Anthony replied, his voice icy. "He thinks he knows something about my car." Thomas inhaled deeply. "The Quantum Apex uses an upgraded version of the Aerotech cooling system I designed. If you don't let me touch it now, you'll lose the car in under half an hour." And that was the fateful moment. 2 men, one who had everything, one who had lost everything, stood together in front of a machine that was dying. The only difference was that the person society had pushed to the margins was the only one who could save it. "This car has a design flaw," Thomas said slowly, eyes fixed on the smoking engine bay. "That flaw was noted during prototype testing but was ignored to meet production schedules. I know because internal documentation with code XT447 described exactly the failure you're experiencing." Anthony flinched. That number, XT447, was known only to insiders. No line of it had ever been made public. He stared at the man before him as if trying to find the gap in a con. "How do you know that code?" he croaked. Thomas answered calmly, "Because I wrote it." The air thickened. The 2 security officers exchanged a look. One of them spoke up. "Mr. Wright, this area is not secure. Your vehicle contains proprietary technology and must be cordoned off." Thomas remained where he stood, not budging. "You have less than 45 minutes before the engine fails completely. The service center can't help. They lack the parts, and they don't understand this failure. Towing it now will only accelerate the damage." Anthony hesitated, his eyes flicking between suspicion and the survival instinct of a desperate man. "Sir," the guard repeated, "please step away from the vehicle." Anthony looked up and interrupted. "Wait, you mentioned XT447. How do you have that?" "Because 5 years ago," Thomas said, "I was a consulting engineer for Aerotech. I wrote that report. My name is Thomas Johnson." The name stirred a faint memory in Anthony, a technical dossier that had once crossed his desk years before. He couldn't recall it clearly, only that the name had been praised for talent and then disappeared without a trace. "Step back, sir," the guard pressed again. Anthony glanced at his watch. 2 hours until the investor meeting. The nearest service station was over 3 kilometers away, and the car couldn't move. The smoke thickened. "What do you need to fix it?" "Basic tools. Available in the vehicle rescue kit. 20 minutes uninterrupted." Anthony looked at the crowd, at the car, then at the ragged man. Everything he had trusted, rules, status, money, suddenly offered no help. "Mr. Wright, I would not recommend—" the guard began. "Check his background first," Anthony ordered. One of the guards moved Thomas aside. Thomas had only a shelter ID card. No address, no job, no income records. When the report came back, Anthony's face hardened to iron. "Perhaps a misunderstanding. Thank you for your concern." His voice was thin, the same tone Thomas had heard as a lifetime of refusals over the past 3 years. Thomas gave a small nod, preparing to leave. But Anthony's phone rang. He pressed it to his ear, hopeful. 2 hours? That's unacceptable. The system shows less than 40 minutes. He walked in tight circles, smoke still billowing. The crowd murmured. Some live-streamed, some snickered. Thomas stood frozen, eyes never leaving the engine. "Is there a risk of explosion?" the guard asked. "No," Thomas replied, voice sure. "The smoke is from Coolant vaporizing on the heat shield. Fire risk is low. The concern is micro-failure at the quantum bearing. Replacement would cost around $870,000. All three men turned as if struck. "How do you know that figure?" Anthony asked, almost a whisper. "Because I used to cost out that component," Thomas said. "Only 2 factories in the world can manufacture that alloy. Lead time, 11 weeks. Silence stretched. Anthony realized this man was saying things that could not be made up. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice deeper, "you say you worked at Aerotech?" "Not just worked," Thomas replied. "I led the thermodynamics team that developed the original cooling system your car uses. Patent AT5729QX 2020. The Quantum Apex is only an expanded implementation." Anthony froze. That serial, AT5729QX, was top secret. He lowered his voice, for the first time stripped of contempt. "If you really are that person, why are you—" "Why I'm homeless," Thomas finished calmly. "Because of false accusations, internal politics, and the prejudice you're showing right now." Anthony paused for a beat. "But now, the important thing is, you have only 35 minutes left." Anthony glanced around. Cameras, the crowd, the smoke, the countdown clock. Reputation, money, the upcoming presentation. Everything was slipping from his grasp. "How will you do it?" he asked. His voice softened. "I need to open the auxiliary cooling chamber, drain the contaminated fluid, seal the crack, then recharge the system." "You need special equipment?" "No, the vehicle rescue kit and a few items from the convenience store across the street will do. I'll finish in 20 minutes. Anthony frowned. "The manufacturer says that must be done in a sterile environment." "They complicate the process to sell expensive services," Thomas replied, calm. "In truth, it's a fluid dynamics problem. I have a safer, more efficient method." One of the 2 guards suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Wright, I think I know this man. He teaches kids at the West Side homeless shelter. I've seen him." "And he actually knows how to do this?" Anthony asked. "The coordinator there calls him a genius," the guard said, a note of respect in his voice. Anthony looked at his watch. The system warning showed only 31 minutes left before the thermal limit. He breathed out and turned to Thomas. "All right, tell me, step by step, what will you do?" Thomas stepped forward, not touching the car, and pointed as he described. "The quantum cooling system has 3 loops. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. The secondary loop contains the nano-stabilizing coolant. The crack is here." He pointed precisely to the area between 2 heat shields. "The fluid is leaking into the tertiary loop and vaporizing on contact with the heat shield, creating the blue-gray smoke. The manufacturer insists on removing the entire engine for fear of contamination, but in reality we only need to isolate this section and use a special thermal adhesive to seal it." Anthony was speechless. Every detail Thomas spoke was accurate to the point of being unbelievable. "Where will you get thermal adhesive right now?" he asked. "From your rescue kit. The common type, combined with nanographite from a Prism Tech brand pencil core across the street. When mixed in the right ratio, it forms a temporarily stable compound, heat-resistant up to 2,000 degrees, enough to hold until you replace the part properly." Anthony froze. "You plan to fix my $4 million hypercar with pencil lead?" Thomas smiled faintly. "A good engineer isn't the one with the biggest lab, but the one who can make the most of what he has." The atmosphere shifted. The 2 guards relaxed. The crowd fell silent. Everyone watched the anonymous man standing before a billionaire. And for the first time, the underdog was the one holding the world's breath. There were 28 minutes left before the system reached destructive threshold. Anthony's investor meeting was in less than 3 hours. His company's engineering team would never arrive in time. The only remaining option sounded absurd. "If you ruin my car—" "It's already damaged," Thomas replied calmly, "and getting worse by the minute. The question is, will you let me fix it before it's too late?" Anthony inhaled, released the hood latch. "Fine, let's see what you can do with pencil lead and desperation." The Quantum Apex's hood rose with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a labyrinth of technology. The crowd murmured. Rare to see the internals of a machine of which only 17 existed. "I need the rescue kit," Thomas said, his tone shifting into the cadence of a lead engineer. Anthony produced the carbon fiber case. Thomas opened it and scanned quickly. "Sufficient for most operations. The rest, have that man buy a Statler Mars Lumograph 8B pencil." The shorter guard glanced at Anthony. Anthony nodded. "Go now." Thomas arranged his tools. His movements were precise, economical, the practiced hands of someone who had spent years in a lab. Anthony watched, unblinking. The shabby figure was dissolving, replaced by a top-tier engineer. "I'll locate the crack after I remove this shield," Thomas explained. "The coolant is clear but will leave a V-shaped residue leading directly to the leak point." "How long were you at Aerotech?" 3 years as head of thermodynamics, 2 years consulting. Before the incident that ended my career." "What incident?" "The prototype failure was blamed on my team. Investigations later showed management forced safety steps to be skipped, but by the time the truth came out, my reputation was gone." Thomas borrowed the light from Anthony's phone, gently removed the shield. A faint hiss escaped. "There it is!" He pointed to a hairline fissure where the vapor was rising. "Right at the junction between the secondary and tertiary loops." "Just a tiny crack caused all this?" Anthony marveled. "This cooling system operates at extremely high pressure. A hairline fissure is enough to trigger a chain of micro-failures." A cold voice cut across the air. "What's going on here?" A tall man in a suit, an executive security badge, Tech Horizon, pushed through the crowd with 2 guards. "Mr. Wright, we received reports someone is tampering with your vehicle. The CEO has sent me to assist immediately." "Thank you, Reynolds, but I've got it under control. This man is performing an emergency repair," Anthony replied. Reynolds' eyes swept over Thomas, wary. "Security protocol forbids unauthorized personnel from touching proprietary technology, especially—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "He knows what he's doing," Anthony said, though his confidence had waned. "With all due respect," Reynolds lowered his voice, "this machine contains intellectual property worth millions. We cannot allow just anyone—" "I'm not just anyone," Thomas said, still working, his voice low and steady. "And we have 18 minutes before the damage becomes irreversible." Reynolds stepped closer, placing a hand on Thomas's arm. "Sir, step away from the vehicle, now." The guard who had gone for the pencils returned, clutching the small bag, freezing at the edge of the crowd. "Reynolds, please," Anthony began, but Reynolds cut him off. "This quarter alone, we've intercepted 3 industrial espionage attempts. How do you know this isn't number 4? The seed of doubt that had never fully left Anthony began to sprout again. The crowd had grown thicker, phones pointed in their direction. One wrong move could take down his reputation, investors, and stock value all at once. "It's better to wait for the company team," Anthony said, his voice faltering. Thomas looked up, his expression free of blame. 15 minutes. If we wait, the quantum stabilization loop will collapse in sequence, taking not just the bearings, but the engine core. 3 months in the shop. "We've already called the police," Reynolds announced, closing the circle around him. "You have no ID, no authorization. Who's to say you won't make it worse? I've already told you the exact failure. At least tomorrow your engineers will know where to start." Thomas stepped back, keeping his dignity intact, though suspicion once again pressed down on him. The guard with the pencils leaned toward Anthony and whispered, "I called the shelter. They confirmed he teaches engineering to the kids. The coordinator called him a genius. Said he used to lecture at MIT. The system chimed. 12 minutes to critical failure threshold. Thomas took his final gamble. "Mr. Wright, make one call to verify who I am. Dr. Eleanor Chen, Space Tech Industries. Tell her Thomas Johnson is here." "Eleanor Chen, Chief Engineer at Space Tech?" Anthony asked, startled. Thomas nodded. "She'll confirm everything I've said." Anthony hesitated for exactly 1 breath, then pulled out his phone. He had Chen's contact saved, proof of his high standing in the tech world. "Eleanor, it's Anthony Wright. Sorry for the sudden call. There's someone here claiming to be Thomas Johnson." Anthony's expression changed the instant her voice came through. He switched to speaker. "Thomas? Thomas Johnson? Is that really you?" Eleanor's voice, professional but unmistakably shocked, echoed through the line. "Hello, Eleanor." Thomas smiled. "It's been 3 years, 4 months, and 22 days. You vanished. We tried to find you," Eleanor said, astonished, then quickly regained focus. "Anthony, do you realize who you're talking to? Thomas is the best thermodynamics engineer I've ever worked with. His quantum cooling design shaped the entire industry. We still use his patent in our spacecraft." "He says he can fix it," Anthony replied slowly. "Claims there's a microfracture in the auxiliary loop. If Thomas says he can do it, then he can," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Aerotech licensed his patents for their automotive division. Reynolds, if you're there, step back and let the best man do his job." Reynolds hesitated. The guard with the pencils now stood closer to Thomas, his stance shifting from suspicion to protection. "There's one thing." Anthony lowered his voice. "He's homeless," Thomas said for him, calm as ever. "For 3 years now." The phone line went silent for a beat. "That's impossible. After the Aerotech case, every major company wanted you. I personally sent an offer." "It's a long story," Thomas said softly. "But right now, Mr. Wright's car has 9 minutes. Right then, the system chimed again. 9 minutes to critical failure." Eleanor's voice sharpened into command. "Anthony, let Thomas repair the car immediately. I've trusted him with billion-dollar spacecraft technology. A car is nothing." Anthony looked at Thomas with a completely different expression. "If you're truly who she says you are, how did you end up like this? False accusations, bias, and a system quick to condemn but slow to correct. Once you fall through the cracks, no address, no phone, no credit. Try climbing back." Thomas held his gaze. "But let's talk about that later. Right now, we save your car." Anthony nodded, shame flickering across his face. "Reynolds, stand down." "Eleanor, thank you." "Thomas," Eleanor said quickly, "call me as soon as you're done. There's always a place for you here." "I'll think about it," Thomas smiled. "Not a promise, but enough." Using an 8B pencil, whose graphite core has high particle density and ultrafine grain, when ground and mixed with the thermal adhesive from the rescue kit, it forms a semi-stable composite that enhances thermal conductivity and seals microfractures more effectively. It can withstand localized thermal spikes long enough for proper cleanroom repairs later. Towing the car now would cause harmonic vibrations, spreading the fissure along the metal grain, which is why Thomas insisted no towing. Anthony clenched the new pencil like a lifeline. "All right, Thomas," he said, his voice firm again. "Do it." And as the hum of the crowd faded to silence, prejudice took one step back to make room for belief. Only 8 minutes remained, enough to change the fate of a machine, and perhaps of 2 men. With his commanding height and freshly groomed appearance, Thomas stepped out with the quiet authority of a man restored. The store clerk gave him a respectful nod. Anthony smiled. "Now you look the part of the brilliant engineer you are." Thomas adjusted his cuff, movements crisp and precise. "Appearances deceive, and I think that's today's lesson." "Exactly," Anthony nodded. "In 40 minutes, we'll show them that substance matters more than style." The black SUV glided swiftly toward Nexus Innovations headquarters. Thomas gazed out the window. The streets he once walked now blurred past in reverse motion. The 2 guards who had tried to chase him away earlier now kept a respectful distance. Anthony scrolled through his tablet. MIT, valedictorian. 3 patents before graduation. Lead thermal engineer at Spacetech by 26. Consultant for Aerotech at 29. Then vanished 3 years ago. Thomas nodded, offering no explanation. "The AO Tech case," Anthony continued. False allegations, prototype failure, major financial loss. You took the blame. I was the scapegoat, Thomas said quietly. Later investigations proved management skipped safety protocols to meet deadlines, but by the time the truth surfaced, my reputation was gone. Surely some company would have taken you in. Dr. Chen seemed eager enough. Thomas gave a wry smile. Once the media says you cost a company millions, doors close silently. Add a note about race, a rumor about being difficult to work with, and no one calls again. And the 3 years homeless? Depression, no income, and a system that traps you once you fall. No address, no phone, no tidy appearance. Suddenly your resume looks like fiction. Anthony fell silent. I'm starting to understand. They entered the gleaming glass atrium of Nexus with 20 minutes to spare. Employees paused, not for Anthony, but for the unfamiliar man walking beside him. Thomas, this is Sophia Reyes, our CTO. The woman, in her early 50s, approached, eyes lighting up. Thomas Johnson from Space Tech? As I once was, Thomas nodded. Your quantum thermal design changed the entire field, Sophia said sincerely. And that's why he's here, Anthony added. He just saved my quantum apex from a supposedly impossible failure. I want his input on our new thermal project. You repaired an auxiliary cooling loop in the field. With what? Sophia asked, stunned. Pencil graphite and emergency sealant, Thomas replied evenly. Sophia broke into delighted laughter. Perfect. Graphite nanograins bond directly with the polymer base of the sealant. That's brilliant. She shook her head. We get so deep into the problem, we forget the simplest path. The conference room doors opened. A dozen investors turned their heads. Anthony stepped up. Before we begin, allow me to introduce Thomas Johnson, inventor of the quantum thrust cooling system 5 years ago, and the man who just repaired my unsalvageable car with a pencil and ingenuity. Nexus presented. Thomas listened, jotting sparse but precise notes. When invited to speak, he talked for exactly 7 minutes, identifying 3 core design flaws, offering 3 concise, elegant solutions, and sketching a modification that could boost efficiency by 34% while cutting costs. The room went silent, then erupted into a storm of questions. 2 hours later, investors left one by one, all having increased their commitments. Anthony closed the door. Admiration unmasked. You didn't just improve our system, you redefined it. Sophia says your adjustments put us years ahead of the competition. Thomas replied modestly, your team built a solid foundation, I just added another layer. As promised, I'd like to bring you on as a consultant. Name your terms. Thomas thought for a moment. Thank you, but perhaps I don't need a title right now. Then chief engineer? Full creative authority? It's not about the title, Thomas said slowly. It's about a larger equation. How many brilliant minds are being wasted because of circumstance? He leaned forward. At the shelter where I teach, there's a biomedical researcher, a programmer, a mechanical engineer, all trapped behind the same barriers I faced. Anthony's tone turned serious. You're talking about something bigger than hiring. Exactly. Thomas pulled folded papers from his jacket. Patent sketches drawn on old newspaper sheets, lines sharp and deliberate. For 3 years, I've been writing out solutions the industry hasn't even named yet. Anthony flipped through them, his eyes widening. This one, quantum neural cooling. That's groundbreaking. I've had plenty of time to think. Thomas smiled lightly. But imagine if those ideas had real resources. Now multiply that by every gifted person society's written off. What are you proposing? Innovation and Recovery Lab, Thomas said, without hesitation. A center for rediscovering and reintegrating lost talent. Not just developing technology, but rebuilding lives, regardless of background or circumstance. You want me to fund it? I want us to co-found it, Thomas replied. Your infrastructure and reach, my engineering and lived experience. These patents alone are enough for phase 1. Anthony studied him, seeing perhaps what the world had missed. So this isn't revenge. It's not just reclaiming your name. You want to change the system. Precisely. Thomas's eyes burned with conviction. The tragedy isn't that I was homeless. It's that society wasted 3 years of my mind and continues to waste countless others. Anthony extended his hand. Thomas Johnson. We're partners. The sketches Thomas had drawn on scraps of old newspaper were worth more than the hypercar he'd just repaired. But their true value lay in the wave of change they set in motion for an industry that nearly lost a brilliant mind. In this world, genius often hides where no one expects it, and is just as easily overlooked by surface judgment. The measure of a society isn't how it celebrates the privileged, but how it recognizes and nurtures talent everywhere. This story isn't just about Thomas and Anthony. It's about you, about potential that others may have overlooked, or that you might be overlooking in someone else. If this story touched you today, subscribe to Beat Stories and share your experience in the comments. The next world-changing idea might come from someone society taught us to ignore. Don't miss the moments that can change your perspective forever. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of what happens when truth finally meets light. We believe to be seen is the first step toward transformation. Stay tuned. The next story could be yours.